If you haven't already, I want to encourage everyone to give to the BAC, and thank you to those donors who have given in honor of this program. I, our guest artists, and all the BAC staff say thank you in capital letters and with big smiley emojis. It's March, and at the moment in Los Angeles, it's not river raining or mudsliding or snowing where it's not supposed to be snowing. So thank you for being inside with us at your computer on this beautiful day. Welcome to Conversations on Art and our virtual studio visit with Elana Mann. We have the usual housekeeping before we launch into our program. So a big thank you to the Brentwood Art Center and our mysterious donor, who shall not be named, for making this program possible, and to the BAC team for working behind the scenes to make everything run smoothly. As you know, we are recording this program. You should have gotten a little notice. And we ask that you please mute your microphones and turn off your video. It helps avoid feedback. During the conversation, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and I will either work them into the discussion or ask them at the end. And in the chat box, you'll also see that we have put some additional information about our guest artist and for you to peruse on your own. But also I want to point out that there is an invitation to an action for tomorrow, the 4th, that Elana is organizing for International Women's Day. So we're really lucky to have her because she's a very busy lady. So Elana Mann and I met around 2011 when I was developing the programming for the PST project we organized at Otis called Doing It in Public, Feminism and Art at the Women's Building. And somehow I suckered her into being part of our conference weekend. And then later in 2013, she participated in an exhibition series called 3 Solo Projects that we organized at the gallery. She had a third of the space to herself and did a joint installation with her friend and sometimes collaborator, Audrey Chan, who was a previous guest on this program. Working with Elana at that time was a real transformative experience for me as a curator. And I believe it was a great experimental moment for Elana and the trajectory of her practice, which we are going to hear about today. And I want to emphasize the word hearing, because making sound and listening are often both the subject and material for Elana's art and activism. So welcome, Elana.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So we're just going to jump in.
All right.
Look at images.
Yeah. So this is an image of my current studio. I'm getting ready, like Meg said, for an action tomorrow. It's in collaboration with 4 different grassroots feminist organizations, Affirm Los Angeles, Ni Santas, Tomorrow Girls Troop, and She Loves Collective. And I knew pretty much all of them, but none of them knew each other. And I really like being a matchmaker / bringing people together. And so I brought everybody together and we came up with this idea for this group art action. So many of my projects blend art and activism, and I also make art that just exists in the gallery as well. You can show the next slide.
So these banners, can you just tell us what these banners are? So does
Yes.
this just announce the different groups, or is this?
So each group came up with their own word or saying that we hand painted onto 15-foot banners. And there's about 20 of them, and there's going to be over 40 participants in the action. And we're going to be holding them, sharing them, moving with them in Los Angeles State Historic Park. And the action is in solidarity with the people that are protesting and fighting for women's rights in Iran.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And you can kind of see, like, we're all going to be wearing these red jumpsuits.
And you're encouraging everyone who's attending to wear red, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so also the collectives are really international and transnational. So Nisantas works with a lot of Latinx community, particularly in South LA and East LA. Tomorrow Girls Troupe works in East Asia, primarily Japan, but they have about 50 members internationally. Affirm LA is a group that is a national activist group, a feminist, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist group. And they have a chapter in Los Angeles. And then She Loves Collective is based out of Glendale. A lot of them are of Armenian or Persian descent, but it's all over the place. And they do a lot of activity here in the Los Angeles region.
Well, it's wonderful you're able to bring them all together.
It's been amazing. The piece is called Lifelines, and I feel like it's really been a lifeline for me too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and one of the things I was going to talk about or ask you about, maybe this is a good time, is kind of with COVID hitting and then all of the protests happening, it seems like you've been out in the streets a lot doing demonstrations and so forth. So it's been a really busy time for you, where some people have hunkered in. It seems like your reach out to other organizations and other people across the world has expanded.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just growing consciousness of the need for people to participate actively in politics and in social justice movements. Mm-hmm. So that is very hopeful, although there's also like the rise of fascism too at the same time around the world. So it's kind of like one is reacting to the other.
Yeah. So why don't we jump into this? What are we looking at? Because this is kind of a pivotal piece for you in terms of looking at the rest of the work we're going to see today.
Yeah, and I think this piece was in the Otis show that you curated. And this is actually a print that I made of a collage. But yeah, so my work, it is really influenced by my background. I come from a Jewish household and was really immersed in that community. Half of the town I grew up in is Jewish. And I went to a Jewish day school. I didn't really even know non-Jewish people until I was 12 and switched to a secular school. And the Jewish congregation that was really my community, we went every weekend and on holidays and stuff. And those were like my parents' best friends and, you know, our extended family. It was a kind of Judaism that practices a liberation theology. So it was really feminist, really humanist, and believed very strongly that our role is to like liberate the world and fight for justice and fight against injustice. And so that is the space that I grew up in. And then to sort of leave that space and emerge into the greater world was really a shock for me, to just be like, oh, you know, we're rewriting, you know, patriarchal prayers in my congregation, but then I'm existing in this really sexist society at the same time. So sound, Judaism's a really oral and oral culture. There's really no indigenous visual culture of Judaism at all. And there's even laws against visuality. And the word listening is a really important word for Jews. It's the first word of our most important prayer. So the act of listening and sound has always been really critical to me and important to me. And this question, what does listening look like, was a guiding question around 10 or 15 years ago. It was a question I was thinking about a lot. Not just like, what do sound waves look like, or what do sound amplifiers look like, but also like, how do I see listening in the world? Like, how does it manifest? So you can see like Pussy Riot in here, and other like Extinction Rebellion activists, and different Occupy. There's a protest of in India in there. So, you know, there's listening technologies like drones and trumpets and stuff like that. And then there's these other listening happenings.
Yeah. And so have you done an edition of this?
Yes. So it's an edition of 25.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. So around this time that I made the collage, I was looking at a lot of like listening technology through the ages. And before electronic amplification, you know, there was like megaphones and ear trumpets and like, you know, shapes that sort of they often are similar to the way that we think of sound in terms of like coming from a source and then like growing and disseminating. So I was thinking a lot about these kinds of forms and how listening can show up in these shapes. And I got really excited by these antique hearing aids, also because they were made for particular ears in mind. They weren't made en masse. They were made for specific people. Some of the designs are the same, but so I ended up collecting maybe 10 of them, and I made this piece with these antique hearing aids. And there's a detail in the next slide. And the story of these hearing aids also is related to the story of just like material technology. So some of them are early plastics that are made from plants, or like rubbers, or you know, you can see just different ways that people handcrafted metal around like 100 years ago or something. And that's really interesting to me too. I'm like really interested in materials and how they
Did you find out who would make these? Like,
I mean, they were like,
was there like a specialty shop where they made amplification devices, or was it?
Yeah, I think that they were like craftsmen that was their specialty. I found these on eBay mostly. So they're just like collectibles. But yeah, different craftsmen had their own, I think, unique like touch and style and design. And some of them even reflect like the fashion of a particular listener. And then the interesting part about all of this is that that recently I sort of discovered, and I probably already knew this at the time, but there are members of my family that actually have like sound disabilities, like in terms of processing sound and like understanding sound, and my son does as well, and we just discovered that. So it's just interesting that like I made this piece, I don't know, 10 years ago, but I think subconsciously, you know, there was part of me that probably knew that like processing sound and understanding sound was like an issue in my like family of origin.
Something at the molecular level.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because it just like, you know, our house could never be that loud, and there was like all these issues with people, with family members, like, you know, getting aggravated when there was too loud sounds. Yeah, so I was collecting all these hearing aids, and then I really wanted to make one of my own design. And I was thinking about my grandfather, who always did this, like to help him hear. He was hard of hearing, and he did this gesture. And so I cast my hand in that gesture and made this like listening device that really does effectively amplify sound, but just has this little hole and then this, you know, trumpet ending. And I did a workshop with this sculpture at the Getty Villa, where I was exploring the sounds of the grounds of the villa. And then during the workshop, one of the participants put the sculpture to their mouth and started making sound. And it was just like a total revelation to me, because a lot of like early sonic technologies can do both. They can receive sound and also amplify sound, but I just never thought about that for this particular sculpture. And it really captured my imagination because, this person's mouth is being covered, but then her voice is being amplified. And I just thought that was such a compelling metaphor for how political movements are working against injustice, or people are, being silenced, or the state is trying to silence them, or different parts of society are trying to silence them, and then they still have resilience and are able to have their voice being heard.
It can still resonate through.
Yeah. And then also I realized that, the sculpture, when put on the mouth, it kind of has a resonance or a similarity to the shofar. And the shofar is a ritual object, a Jewish object that is played during the new year. And the sound is actually supposed to have a mystical power. Like it's supposed to vanquish illness and be able to kind of like cleanse you. And I just love that idea that one sound can have this whole other kind of impact. And we know that to be true politically, but just like in terms of abstract sound, I just love that idea.
Yeah. Well, and there are cleansing rituals that you can do with clapping and just making sound in a space and changing the energy.
Totally. Yeah. And so these are sort of reworked versions of those hand horns that are painted purple to really just talk about like bruises or just like the body in a different way. And then you can go to the next slide.
Well, I was going to ask a question about this. So you have them displayed in a really interesting way. So are they displayed at different heights so people can approach them?
Yeah. So this was.
So can they speak? Can they speak into them and listen?
Yeah. So this was pre-COVID. I don't know
Yes.
if people would do this now.
You'd have to have the little sanitizer down at the bottom.
Yeah, but they were at different heights that were like mouth height. So you could go up to them and speak through them.
If you listened into these, since we can't physically hear them right now, do you get like a ambient sound that kind of comes through if there's nothing else going on? Like kind of like when you listen to a seashell, when you put a seashell up?
Yeah, totally. It also really makes you listen to your own interior sounds. And that is.
We actually make a lot of noise just being still.
Absolutely. And I started to really tune into your bodily sounds when I was studying the work of Pauline Oliveros, who she pioneered this whole system of listening called deep listening. And she made all these pieces that anybody could do. Anybody can perform them. So yeah, so those like interior sounds are really interesting and important. And so I made a second sort of, not version, but like a second piece in this series that really played upon speaking. Rather than just like listening. And this you could use as a listening device too. But and also around this time, I had my son, my first child, and I really like attribute that to continuing my work with listening, but then also kind of like finding my own voice, or like sort of starting to express sound through the sculptures, because it was a very difficult experience having my son. And so I just felt like really empowered by that experience, and also connected to humanity in a new way, just like walking down the street, like looking at people, just being like, somebody did to you what I am doing to my son. Like everybody, everybody has that in their life. Yeah.
What are these made out of?
So these are cast plastic. I've also made versions in bronze and aluminum, but the plastic actually sounds amazing. And it's interesting because I've spoken with musical instrument makers, and a lot of them really feel like as long as it's a really hard material, that they don't feel like there's that much of a difference between like brass or plastic or aluminum or whatever. So yeah, so it just like, it needs a certain amount of density and hardness.
And do you make molds, or is it like, yeah,
So
they're cast, right?
they're cast from a mold, and I really, it's important to me to make them in multiples, because I want to think of like a group using them rather than as just an individual user object. And in Judaism, like 10 people is a group. Like that amount is really significant. Like you can, with 10 people, you can do all sorts of like rituals and important religious things. So I really work off of like 10 when I can as a number. So there's like 10 of these, there's 10 of the other ones. And the like the idea of the collective or collective voice, that's really important to me too, that these kind of express that power of coming together. So I've been working with the sculptures in different ways. I have used them a lot in protests. So this is a May Day march to talk about like labor issues. And I also collaborate with other activists and musicians as well. So I've had people create like musical pieces with the sculptures.
And how are they received? Like, how do people respond to them when you see a group of your friends carrying these?
Yeah, I mean, the response is amazing. I feel like they're really iconic, and they're incredibly legible, and so people get it right away, and are very receptive to them. They're loud, but they're not like, I have other instruments that are kind of like ear-piercingly loud, or they can be, but these are not. Like you use them and they definitely amplify the voice, but they're not like, they don't become like sound torture or whatever. And I also made a mural with my friend Derek. This was in 2016, of him holding the piece, and the response to this too is really incredible. Just seeing strangers post it online.
Where is the mural?
Well, it was only up for a year, but this was in Culver City.
Okay.
Yeah, it was it was on the exterior of a gallery. This was Beck Art Gallery. And this is a still from a performance that was specifically around violence against women. And the performance was a part of an opera about violence against women that used my sculptures in the opera. And then I had the performers re-perform the piece during one of my exhibitions. And the crazy thing about this performance is that it happened the week of the Brett Kavanaugh and Dr. Blasey Ford hearings. And in that hearing, Dr. Blasey Ford is like talking about Brett Kavanaugh like covering her mouth while she tried to scream. So yeah, just the timing of it was really pretty remarkable. and there's a video of it too.
Yeah, so we're gonna see if we can play that right now. Let me see if I can.
So you can see two of the composers in this image. The middle one is Sharon Chohi Kim, and then the one on the right is Michaela Tobin. I can't see that image, but I can
Oh, you
hear
can't?
it. No.
Okay, let me, I think I have to do another share. So let me,
Aha, I can see it now.
okay, let me just scroll back just a little bit.
Okay, and I just want to say that the sound is all from the sculptures. There's no like electronic amplification. Meg, the sound is kind of cutting out, so I think we should maybe not show it just because I can't really hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can other people hear it?
Ugh.
Okay.
Ugh.
It's playing.
You need a really high speed internet to
Okay.
but we can maybe share the link, and then people
Yeah.
can watch it afterwards.
Jordan or Jason, can you share the link in the chat for people? Because it is really beautiful. It's playing perfectly on my computer. So let me see if I can get back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so can everyone see the PowerPoint now?
Yeah.
Okay. So they'll put the link to the Vimeo in the chat so you guys can get it there. Well, I'm sorry we can't hear it.
That's okay.
Okay.
And I also have used these sculptures in collaborations with activists. And so this is one of those collaborations. It's with a group called Tomorrow Girls Troop. And they are an incredible group of activists that do a lot of actions in Japan and campaigns in Japan.
Mhm.
And you know, it's a really different thing being a feminist activist in Japan than it is in the United States. The context is totally different. And they wear masks because it's not safe for them to be public figures there. It's a much more patriarchal culture. And so working with them was really interesting because just learning about the context of like being a woman or being a feminist in Japan and how different that was or is. And then working on this poster together, it was really even hard just getting people to agree to pose for it, even people that live in the United States. But we eventually did, and we made two versions of the poster, and this was during the 2018 elections, which was the election where the most women were ever elected to political office in the history of the United States. And so the English version is a woman's places in the House and the Senate, and then the Japanese version is gender equity at home and in public.
Wow. And where were these posters?
So they were displayed. This is an image from an exhibition that I had, and you can't see, but there's a whole wall graphic that talks about the similarities between President Trump and Prime Minister Abe. And like they were really good friends, and it was kind of clear why, because they both had very similar views on how to treat women and other people. And then these posters have been used in a number of actions by Tomorrow Girls Troop. This action took place in Tokyo, and it was a group called Parité 50/50 that is trying to agitate for 50% representation of women in Japanese politics. And they do an action every year on the day that women were granted the right to vote, which was like in 1949, like much
Mhm.
later than here in the United States.
Right. But not that much later.
Not that much later, I know. Yeah, and it's so interesting working with activists because like they have such a different timeline. Like they need things done really quickly. And they're kind of like responding to things that are happening on the ground in the moment. And art is really slow. It's a really slow process. So the poster was kind of like, okay, we're going to make it. Oh, maybe not. Like, oh, now it's time. And so it's just like this dance. But I always learn so much just working with different groups. And so and working that way more nimbly and more just like fast is just a different kind of challenge. So
Well,
as
it
long
must
as
be
I,
a
yeah,
nice balance, right? Because then these projects that take so long and you have this like delayed gratification and then you have just this immediate infusion of energy.
totally. Yeah. So this is a piece that's up right now. I have a show up at an artist run space called Irenic Projects that's run out of a incredible mid-century modern church in Altadena.
Mhm.
And I just finished this piece a few weeks ago. And it's a cut paper on mirror and it says, "What can listening do?" So you see your reflection like in the words. And that's really question that has been guiding me more recently, maybe in the past 3 or 4 years. And it also has come at a time where like I've done a lot more looking inside and realizing that I am a survivor of abuse. And so just with that bringing that consciousness more into my work and to the actions that I'm doing. And so these are pieces that I started making in 2019. I was going to a lot of street protests and demonstrations and wanting to bring something to them that I could just easily stick in my bag, but that could like amplify my presence. I just didn't have time to make like even just like cardboard signs. I just like literally was just like had a really young child and was pregnant with my second child. And I decided to make these ceramic rattles. And one of them said no, and one of them said yes. And I started bringing them to protests. This one is at the Japanese American Museum in Little Tokyo. And it was a protest against Trump's immigration policies or family separation policy. And yeah, just like they were so powerful in the crowd and people were responding to them in such incredible ways. And I just really
Are they loud?
they can be very loud. Yes. So depending on how you play them, they can be really loud. And clay also like has different resonances depending on what kind of clay that you use.
Mhm.
This rattle too, after I made it, I was like, oh, I made a grogger. And groggers are Jewish ritual objects that you play on the
Oh, they're the spin.
yeah. You play them on the holiday of Purim, which is actually Monday. And Purim is this holiday where it's kind of like Mardi Gras plus like remembrance of almost being annihilated and wiped out, put into one. And you tell this story of like this man, Haman, who's being hung in this picture, that tried to like kill all the Jews. And when his name is spoken out loud, you play this really loud grogger, this rattle, to drown out his name. And I feel like it's almost as if, I mean, it's a kind of way to teach people to speak out and speak up when there's injustice. And to like be as one and use your voice, use sound. It's like a training almost for everybody. And so, yeah, so I just like saw these rattles as relating to that holiday. And I've been using them in groups. I've made about 70 of them. I don't have all of them, but I maybe have like less than 50 right now, but I bring people together to play them. And it's just a really incredible experience.
It's a powerful image too, because it's one that we talked about this the other day a little bit, where it's a rattle, it's a noisemaker. Rattles are associated with also babies and becoming aware of using their ears and their sound and so forth. But then it's like a gavel. And it's also a weapon. It's got all of this charged visual meaning behind it.
Totally. And each one has a different, there's a number of shapes, like 5 shapes or 6 shapes, and then each one has a different word or symbol or color. Yeah, so this is like one of them. This was a protest after the leaked opinion of Dobbs of Roe versus Wade being overturned. So we brought them out for that. And a lot of people, have this experience with them because they are so loud, where they become like sonic shields. And also use them in the same way as the groggers, where, there were at this protest in particular, there was some very extreme anti-abortion counter protesters, and members of my group just like rushed them and started playing the rattles and just totally drowned them out. Like you couldn't hear them at all. So that was really interesting. And people have talked about feeling more safe and more empowered, even though it's so small. But just something about the sound and making these sounds with a group. You're very vulnerable, and these objects are vulnerable too. Like a number of them have been dropped and broken. But yeah, there's also
fragile
just like,
material. Ceramic that's what's wonderful about it, is it's both strong and fragile at the same time. Which is exactly the rights we're fighting for, right? Are both strong and fragile at the same time.
Totally. Yes, this is a shot of the entire group. And then I've started to be contacted by different groups around the country and the world that want to start their own rattle bands. And so this is these are rattles from a group from Pennsylvania. They're all potters, and so they got together and threw these on the wheel, and had their own symbols and sayings and aesthetics, and have used them in protests locally, and also have sold them as a fundraiser. And the situation in Pennsylvania is very different than in California. And so I think that's also just so interesting, how these represent different voices and different locations and different parts of society. And then I've also been contacted by a group in Spain that wants to start making their own there. So it's been really...
People in Pennsylvania see your rattles and then decide to make them?
Yeah, so they saw my rattles and then they contacted me and asked, like, can we make our own? I was like, yes, please. Awesome. Yeah, it's just
wonderful.
So interesting, because I feel like the rattles are really simple, but it's just an idea that's resonated. So I'm really so enthralled and excited and enthusiastic by folk music and folk instruments. And here is this incredible folk instrument that I found in 2018 in Claremont. There's a folk music center there. And the person that founded the folk music center was a very active communist and made this for protest. It's a 6-person horn. And if you see the tubes coming out from like the main flange, those are all siren whistles. So they go like a siren.
Oh,
It still
really?
works to this day. And I just was enthralled by this object. It was also based on Tibetan horns that are like these religious ritual objects. And I actually, a friend of mine gave me two Tibetan horns. So yeah, I just love, I love this object. This was displayed in an exhibition alongside my folk instruments. And then I really wanted to make, so you can kind of see.
Yeah.
And in the background is the musical score for the piece, the operatic piece that you saw with the hand horn. So
yes,
that's,
and I just want to say the link is now in the chat too. So if you guys want to copy that, you'll have it to view later.
Yeah, so I really wanted to make my own version of this amazing 6-person horn. And
there it is.
There it is. But with mine, I really wanted to focus on the voice instead of siren whistles. I just didn't identify with the siren sound. And I also wanted to make an instrument that mandated listening along with amplifying sounds. So you literally have to hear each other, like work with a group in order to use this piece. And yeah, so I made like just speaking tubes. So each one of those tubes amplifies the voice, and it's made out of fiberglass. I think there's a detail on the next slide. Yeah. So it's cast fiberglass, but I painted it to look like terracotta. And I also, I 3D printed it. I covered it with clay, and I put handprints into the clay. And so those are on the object.
Wait, so you 3D printed the prototype, put clay on it, and then cast it? Okay.
Yeah. I actually first made a full-scale model in cardboard of it.
Okay, mock-up and not a mock, yeah.
And then 3D, yeah. It was a whole process, yeah.
That's great.
So
did you have to 3D print it in sections and then put it together, or could you print? Okay.
Yeah, it was 3D printed in sections.
Okay.
And then I attached the mouthpieces last. This is a print called Self-Portrait as Radical Empath, which I think relates to the horn. I'm like making myself, or like my head, into a horn. I was when I came up with this image, I was thinking a lot about the people's mic. It's a technology that is used in protest spaces when you don't have electronic amplification. A speaker speaks, and then the crowd right in front of them repeats their words word for word, so that the crowd in back of them can hear, and then they repeat it for the crowd in back of them, and it kind of moves through a space. So I was thinking a lot about like what it means to be a human microphone, and just like giving your body to someone else's words, and how does that change you or make you think differently to have those words be in your body. And then kind of thinking about somebody literally like putting their mouth on my mouth and then like amplifying their own sound. It was really fascinating to me.
Well, and something I've been thinking a lot about too is just your own circle of influence, right? And so what you're in proximity to, and how you can take something from over here and move it through. You might not be able to get it everywhere, but even just getting it to the next person in line is still a process of amplification and moving an idea forward.
Totally.
so that we all, even though they keep wanting to say we're powerless, we do have the power.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so I just did a collaborative performance with the composer Sharon Chohi Kim and 11 artists. I also had musician Corey Fogel write a piece for my rattles. He's a percussionist. And these 6 vocalists, opera singers, activated the horn, and we can just cut and paste the video, but yeah, it was very loud and amazing.
I'm not sure I can cut and paste it, but we'll get it put in there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was incredible to see it activated for the first time, even though I had finished it in 2020. It was just not safe to use it.
Yep.
This is a series of rattles that I made before the protest rattles. These were actually the first time I had ever worked in clay. And I was thinking a lot about the act of blame and accountability, social accountability, and finger pointing. And this image came to my mind after I was having a debate with my dad about the state of Israel, in which we saw the whole situation in very different ways. And I was thinking about how, like, when you blame something or somebody or point fingers, then it also implicates you or points back at you. And so I decided to use this motif of fingers pointing and these rattles, these like rattle shakers, and kind of configure them in different ways. Yeah, so they all have a different form and kind of talk about this continuum of like blame versus accountability. This one I feel like looks kind of like a mouth. And I had cast 22 people's right and left index finger. This one looks like a meat cleaver to me. Kind of like my mom making schnitzel or something. And this is, these are all women identified bodies, female identified bodies. And this one's was like a Me Too rattle. And so different ones were kind of thinking about different movements or ideas. I'm also really influenced by this Jesuit philosopher named Athanasius Kircher. And he is credited with inventing the megaphone and also with having one of the world's first Wunderkammers. So he also is like an early inventor of the idea of a museum. And he had all this philosophy around sound, how sound works. And so this is his idea of how sound moves through a snail shell. And here is another shot of the performance, Hope is a Hammer, that the different performers performing with these finger rattles.
It's nice that you're collaborating with musician and performers too.
Yeah, I love it. They always bring such a different like experience to each piece, and I learned so much, and it just makes me so thrilled to see the sculptures being used in different ways.
We had a question about, are you painting, or is that vinyl, or the graphic image that's on the wall?
Yeah, so that was taken directly from a Kircher book, a published book of his in Latin. And this was vinyl. I have painted them also in other installations. So I've done both vinyl and paint. This is a related body of work. I've made these series of bowls, and they're also thinking about blame and accountability, but in kind of in an opposite way, in terms of like that all of the fingers are encased in these vessels. And it was really inspired by reading and thinking about the Jewish philosopher and activist Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was really active in the civil rights movement. And he has this quote that says, in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And so I think about that. I've been thinking about that a lot. And this really encapsulated that for me.
Well, I love this image because on one hand, it could be so soothing, like diving into it, but on the other hand, it could be very torturous. So again, that ambiguity.
Yeah. This is a piece that I made in the lead up to the 2016 elections. I started thinking about it when Donald Trump announced his candidacy. I was just like, oh, what an asshole megaphone. And then I made it. So it's this is a cast asshole anus, and it's gold plated with 18 karat gold, and it caps this this cast bronze megaphone. Yeah, the Donald trumpet. And I think this last image is my last image, which is a quote by Corita Kent. She's also a huge influence of mine, and somebody I return to a lot, look at her work. And I made this at the beginning of COVID. We are either going to become a community or we're going to die. And Barbara Ward was an economist, and she really pioneered the idea of like sustainability. Yes, this is
an edition.
Yeah, so it's an edition, 3 different colors, and there's 17 of them.
It's beautiful. So do you have any other programs? You've got the event tomorrow, which everyone is invited to. And do you have anything else coming up?
So I have, this show at Irenic Projects that is up through May.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, someone just said they don't understand the Corita Kent part, but it's the object, right? That you're in.
So she had a poster that had the exact same saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I just sort of took the quote and I made my own version of her poster.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Oh, wait. So go back and tell us about the space, the church you were telling us about.
Yes.
Tell us the name and.
So it's the name of the arts organization. It's called Irenic Projects. Irenic, I had to look it up, but it's a Christian word that means like movement towards peace, which I love. And my Jewish congregation met in a church. We were so small that we just like rented space in a church. So I have a lot of like early memories of being in church spaces. And yeah, it was designed by a really well-known mid-century modern architect, John Galbraith, that worked a lot around Pasadena, and it's gorgeous. The architecture is so stunning. And it's a 2-person show with painter James Griffith. So my work is in the lobby and his is in the sanctuary.
And how long will that be up for?
We're hoping it's going to be up through May. The church is for sale. So, but yeah, we're hoping that the run of it can last until then.
Good. That's great. Well, this has been really wonderful. Thank you so much. And we've got the notes, which there's instructions on how to download all the notes if you want to capture that in the chat. And then also we have our next talk with the artist Elizabeth Turk on April 7th. So we hope you'll go online and register for that, because I know that will be a wonderful conversation too. So very strong women who are doing some really amazing work out in the community and on the streets. So thank you, Elana. It was great having you here today.
Thanks so much, Meg. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Everybody take care. Have a good weekend.